Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome teachers, students, and many EF staffers. We are so glad you have decided to join us virtually for this exciting event today in celebration of Veterans Day with our very special esteemed guest, Captain Steve Shepard, who goes by Shep. My name is Darby, and I oversee educational partnerships for EF, and I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah, who organizes events for teachers around the country. Sarah will be co-moderating the event with me today as we hear Shep's riveting story. And so, Shep, an enormous thank you to you for your service to this country and sharing your story with teachers and students far and wide. We are thrilled to be in an exclusive partnership with the Honor Flight Network that has afforded this opportunity, especially during this commemorative week. Veterans Day is truly a celebration to honor America's veterans for their patriotism, their love of country, and willingness to serve and sacrifice for the common good. So, Shep, we salute you. Quick reminder, although we can't see the rest of you, please type in any questions you might have into the Q&A feature during our time together. And Sarah will be keeping an eye on that, and we will save some time at the end to go through some of those questions. So with that said, welcome, Shep. We turn this over to you to share your story. And if you don't mind, just starting at the beginning, that would be awesome. So before you get into your incredible 31-year career in the military, please just share a bit about where you're from, your family, and your upbringing would be awesome. And then what sort of led you in the direction that you've taken. So, Shep, over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Darby. Appreciate it. Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're watching from. I'm Captain Steve Shepard, USN, retired. I retired last year after a 31-year career in the U.S. Navy. I was born and raised in Norfolk, Virginia, on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And I came from a family with a long military tradition. My grandfather was a yeoman in the Navy in World War I, and my father served in the Army in the Pacific Theater in World War II. Additionally, my uncle served in Vietnam, as did my father-in-law, who did multiple tours over there. When I retired, I had immediate family member on active duty for over 65 years. So grew up with a lot of military history and tradition. And I think that was important. I knew from an early age and growing up in Norfolk, which is the world's largest naval base, that I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. And the Navy attracted me. When I was a little boy, I used to go to a museum in Norfolk called the MacArthur Memorial. I remember walking through there as in elementary school, seeing all the things that General Douglas MacArthur did during his 50-plus year military career and wondering what I could do. It seemed like a life of adventure, a life of travel, and I wanted to be a part of that. And I can tell you during my career, I was not disappointed. I ended up serving around the world. I served in the Middle East. I served in Asia. I served in Central America and plenty of other places around the world on 7 different aircraft carriers. I think for those of us who are students, as we work and study, we want to learn about the world around us, and then you prepare to go see it and learn about it. So I think being in the military gave me a ticket to travel that I otherwise would not have had. And it's interesting, when I look back on the career I did have, it seemed like the world events were kind of guiding that. And I think that's kind of a good way to compare what was going on in the world at the time I was in the service. I entered the Navy in 1990, right at the beginning of Operation Desert Storm. And that's when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And so I joined the Navy then, and I was on an aircraft carrier that was heading over to the Middle East when the war ended. And that was an interesting time because we were still really dealing with one other major adversary in the world, and that was the Soviet Union, which is today Russia. And I think it's important to remember that at that time, nuclear weapons were a very serious threat. And Russia and the US and a few other countries had nuclear weapons, and we lived under that constant concern about nuclear war, and nuclear weapons were keeping the peace. We used to have bombers and airplanes airborne 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to make sure that we had what we called our nuclear deterrence. So that was kind of the world that I entered the Navy in, and going into the Middle East and going to help liberate Kuwait was a kind of something that showed that where we were going to go based on the geopolitical environment, the politics of geography, which would soon be guiding our nation. Shortly after that tour, I went to the Middle East. I spent several months in the island country in the Persian Gulf called Bahrain. And we were there watching the ceasefire, making sure that everything remained stable. And then later I went to a place in Panama, Howard Air Force Base, and we were doing counter drug missions. So at that time, there was a big concern about illegal drugs coming up from South America via Central America into the US. The government, President Bush, put a US military forces down into Panama and elsewhere to kind of use their resources to stop and detect drugs from coming into the US. It was the war on drugs. And so that was an interesting time to be tracking these drug runners flying by airplanes and coming in by the sea and catching them to keep the drug from coming to the US and hurting our people. Once I finished that tour, I probably did the most rewarding tour that I can think of, and that was working in the POW MIA office, where I was looking for Americans missing from the Vietnam War. So for 3 years, I worked on that issue. I traveled to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And it was like being a cold case detective. I was looking for Americans who had been shot down or captured by an enemy, trying to find out what had happened to them so we could bring them home. It was a very emotionally rewarding job. We were able to find the remains of several Americans, but there's still several missing today. In fact, there are over 1,582 Americans still missing from the Vietnam War. What we did, we used all source intelligence, and that was my primary specialty as an intelligence officer, is I would go and use things like OSINT, open source intelligence, that's like newspapers, magazines, something known as human intelligence, and that's where you talk to people to get intelligence information. Something called SIGINT, signals intelligence, that's like listening in on conversations, like listening on someone's cell phone. And then also GEOINT, geospatial intelligence, that's like satellite intelligence or airplanes taking pictures of places. So using all that intelligence and then going out into the field of Vietnam, we were able to locate crash sites that previously had been lost. And I still think about that job because I still know that there are families who don't have answers that they want to have. And so it's important that we as Americans never forget those who go on the field of battle and that we always bring them home. And I think that's probably one of the most important things as we think about Veterans Day, is we remember those who put the uniform on to go forth and serve their nation. Now, it's different than Memorial Day, because Memorial Day is where we remember those who died in service. But I think as a veteran, you can't help but think about those who put on the uniform and did not come back. And so in a sense, today we wear the uniform for them, not only to remember us, but to remember them. Shortly after that tour, I ended up going to a place called the Joint Warfare Analysis Center, where I was a targeting officer. So I'd be looking at different ways to use aircraft and other means by which we would take down an enemy's capabilities to fight. Maybe the air defense abilities, maybe the way they resupply ships, etc. And it was during that time that we had 9/11. And that was a time when the really interesting time for our nation. And I've been in the military probably just about 11 years when 9/11 happened. And I was not in the Pentagon that day, but I was in Washington, D.C. And I can tell you, it was just a real time of chaos as we were trying to figure out who attacked us, why they attacked us, and when and where we were going to get attacked next. It was an interesting time that we as a nation really came together. I'll never forget coming home from work that day and watching the people in uniform go pick up their kids from school right down the street. I remember neighbors coming out of their house to come up to me and check on me, find out if I was okay. And so when we think about 9/11, I think, we have the spirit of 9/11. I think we think about the spirit of 9/12, where we came together as a nation. And that's so important. We have all these challenges that face our nation, but we can lick anything as long as we come together and work as a team. Doesn't matter what political party you are, what background you are, race, creed, what matters is that you're an American. And that's the most important thing we can do is work together. And I can tell you from September 11th to December was a blur. I went down to Florida to U.S. Central Command, the headquarters for operations in the Middle East, and just worked targeting issues just for straight during the ground offensive and when we liberate Afghanistan from the Taliban. And that was another very rewarding tour because we were making a difference and we were ensuring that those who attacked America would not be allowed to continue to hurt her. I do remember also a German ship in the Atlantic at that time. It came by one of our warships. As the German ship came close, the German crew had mustered on the outside the ship and held a sign up that said, "We will stand by you." So it wasn't just Americans coming together with all our allies. We will stand by you. And I think that was important to note, that we went in there in a common cause for freedom. And after that tour, I had the opportunity eventually to go to Germany. And I was based in Stuttgart, Germany, which was a great town. In Stuttgart, I was able to travel throughout Europe and be able to kind of help people, and work with the German government quite a bit on doing host nation events. But I think it was that chance of being in Europe that I really was able to kind of get a worldview of how the world was around me. And I'd previously served in Japan and had been on aircraft carrier in Japan. That also was a rewarding time. Anytime you get a chance to go overseas, you really do appreciate your country. You start to appreciate what it means to you. And when you see your flag flying in a foreign land, it gives you a sense of pride, and it makes you appreciate where you came from and what you need to do to defend it. And I think with all those things, that helps you better become an American and understand her freedom and the value and cost of freedom. After I left there, I went to an aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, and we did a deployment to Persian Gulf. We ended up fighting pirates off an aircraft carrier. So that was a little bit different, keeping the sea lanes safe. It was after a couple of ships had been seized by pirates. So we took an aircraft carrier down there to kind of dissuade the pirates and to keep the sea lanes free. It was during that time that, I really think you appreciate what a Navy can do. It's not just about having aircraft that launch off the decks, but it's also about being able to protect the sea lanes where a lot of our commerce comes, and to allow them to operate freely around the world wherever they go. It's also during that time I had a chance to go to Iraq for a few days and see that country as it was struggling for freedom and starting to stand on its own. And the Iraqis want to be free, and they're making progress, and we're thankful that our carrier and others could help them on that journey. Shortly after that tour, I was graced with the opportunity to command. I ran a joint military intelligence training center, and we trained 10,000 people a year on intelligence, US, coalition partners from Europe, elsewhere. And it was during that time that I really got to see that how we could operate as a global community, because it's not just about the US. For us to be successful, we really need to, again, as I mentioned, have a worldview of the world around us. And that was a great opportunity just to meet different people from different cultures and understand how they looked at problems and situations. Because my view as an American might not be the best answer, but by learning about them, connecting with them, understanding their culture, understanding their sensitivities, we can become better partners and better friends. The fact that we had so many European countries work with us in Iraq and Afghanistan, because we'd spent 60 years previously, since the end of World War II, working together to forge common bonds of friendship and for freedom. But another thing that taught me is one time I went to Azerbaijan, and we were meeting with some of the leadership in Azerbaijan, and the president of Azerbaijan was there. And we were trying to encourage him to strengthen his relationship with the United States. And he said, well, look, I want to strengthen my relationship with the United States, but I cannot change geography, because Azerbaijan has a border with Russia. So I think when you look at those things, you have to understand their view and their viewpoint, so you can better appreciate them and work with them to kind of find those common goals. After that, I did some time at different tours in the United States, Naval Air Forces and so forth. And that all culminated in one of my favorite assignments, and that was when I was the Information Warfare Commander for the USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group, where we did a 10-month worldwide deployment starting in Norfolk and ending up in San Diego. We originally were only supposed to be 7 months, but because of a situation in the Persian Gulf, where the Iranians were mining warships, we were called there to provide deterrence. And the thing that really impressed me about that was that despite those 10 months, our crew remained very resilient. They did not complain. They knew they had a job at hand. And as I looked around them, I was very proud to be a part of a team that was ready to serve wherever called, whenever called, forever long they were called. And it really made me proud of our country, and it made me think about all those people who had gone before us in the years, who had served our country. Sometimes people go into combat during their career. Other times they serve 3 or 4 years and never hear a shot fired. The important thing is that they served, and it gives you an understanding of freedom that otherwise you might not have. And I think that is probably the important thing, is that as we think about all the changes that are going on in our country, we must always remember that we're Americans and that we work together. And when I was in my aircraft carrier and in the military, one of the most important things was we always had a sense of unity. We didn't identify as a political group, we identified as Americans. And what really defined you was your performance. And I think that our performance is really tells people who we are. And I think for me, that's what I really kind of gained out of it. But before we get to questions, I just want to share one thing. As I mentioned, my father-in-law was in Vietnam. In fact, he was one of the last 50 Americans out of Vietnam in April 1975. My uncle, in a strange coincidence, was flying overhead an Air Force aircraft providing protection. But the day my father-in-law left, he walked into a conference room of a U.S. Military building and grabbed the U.S. flag because he didn't want to leave it behind. One of the few things, he took a pillowcase out of Vietnam, and that flag is one of the few things he took. That flag is the flag I have right here. And this flag reminds me of the fact that we don't leave our flags behind in the storm. We always take our flag with us. And whenever there's a storm, like troubles our countries are going through, we keep the flag flying. We come together as Americans, we work out our problems together as Americans, and we appreciate freedom. So I think this flag reminds me of the cost of freedom, the value of freedom, and the fact that no matter how bad the storm is, we always keep the flag with us. We don't abandon the flag, and we come together as Americans. Each of these stars represents our states. It represents the faces of our nation underneath those stars. So that's one of the most important things I'd like to pass on to you. And so now, that's all I have. I'm open to take some questions. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer some.
Thank you so much for that, Shep. What an interesting and amazing career you've had. It feels like you've lived 100 lives. I'm sitting there, I'm like, wait, and that, that's so amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your service and all that you did in every capacity that you did it in. I'll remind everybody, if you have questions, pop them into the Q&A. I'm going to read through a few that we have already. And one of the first ones was, I'm interested to know how actually you chose the Navy out of all of the military branches. What drew you to the Navy specifically?
Well, I had thought about the Army for a long time, but I think the Navy, growing up on the water, learning how to sail in Norfolk, I'd actually been a deckhand on a dinner cruise vessel in the city of Norfolk. And I love being out there on the water and just being in the environment and the fresh sea air, and it kind of bit me. And I think I like being on the ocean and being able to travel.
Great, that's awesome, thank you. One of the other questions that came up, you're obviously in your uniform, looking very sharp. We were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about some of the pins and different insignia that you have actually there on your uniform, and how you came about to have those.
Sure. So the ribbons I wear here that I have on my uniform are representative of my career. The top row are basically, those are personal awards. So the very top award is the Defense Superior Service Medal. And as you work your way down, they are campaign awards, places I've served. On here, I've got Southwest Asia, that's the Persian Gulf Service Ribbon. I've got the Global War and Terrorism Service Medal, that's for operations going to Persian Gulf, supporting Afghanistan and Iraq. I've got the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal for going into, I believe that's also the Persian Gulf, and the Korean Defense Service Medal for when we were doing operations off Korea. And then Sea Service Awards and Overseas Service. They're designed really to reflect a service member's individual service, where he served in a sense. The Sea Service Ribbon, which I have 4 stars on, that's actually my 5th award. That is what I like to think is my credibility ribbon. So when people, when I talk about going to sea, when I talk about being an aircraft carriers, I'm wearing my ribbons, they're going to see if I have a Sea Service ribbon and how many stars I have on it. It's kind of a credibility thing. Under the gold pin under here is my command pin when I was in command of the Joint Military Intelligence Training Center. And then this pin is the Office of the Secretary of Defense. So when I was doing the Vietnam MIA work, I was working for the Secretary of Defense team and doing that. And then the top is my warfare pin. So if I was a pilot, I'd have a pilot insignia. If I was a submariner, I'd have a submarine insignia. If I have an information warfare pin because I'm an intelligence officer.
Amazing. It's incredible to get that sort of a translation, because there's a lot there, and they're all super meaningful. Thank you. Another question that came up. So you mentioned your work with the MAs in Vietnam, and that's such an incredible job that you had. And I think one that people don't necessarily think of when they think of the tasks and missions and work that military might do. So I'm curious, are we still searching today? You mentioned that there's still some people who are unaccounted for. Are those missions and that work still happening?
Yes, the work is still ongoing. Actually, I was just at the National League of Families, which is a group of family members who still have loved ones missing in Vietnam, and I was a part of some briefings there where I presented. The work goes on, and they're looking at Korea as well as World War II. I think the problem with Vietnam, obviously, as people get older, you lose some of your witnesses. You know, we've been working at it since 1985 is when we started having investigative teams in Vietnam. And then 1993, we started opening up more exchange with the Vietnamese. But it's really a humanitarian issue. And it's not only about us providing information, about receiving information on our remains, it's about us helping the Vietnamese find out where their soldiers are buried as well. So there's still a lot of work going on there. The teams go over there every year. Really the biggest enemy is time, you know, as people pass on and the environment changes, is trying to find those crash sites and the answers to those questions.
That's great. Super important work to try and bring all that closure together for those families. So that's great to hear. Another question that came up while we were hearing your story, you mentioned defending against some pirates, and I'm sure a lot of the students in the room may only know the pirates that you know from the movies. So I'm wondering if you might be able to explain a little bit more about what that was like and
Sure.
you know exactly you were defending us against.
So, you know, if you guys, there was the Maersk Alabama, and there was a movie, Captain Phillips, had been seized by pirates, and the U.S. Navy had used some SEALs to launch a rescue mission to free Captain Phillips. And as a result of that, the pirates tempered their activities. But what happens is when you go down there are ships down there who were trying to protect themselves from being boarded by pirates. They put, you know, physical obstacles on the ship to prevent pirates from boarding them. But sometimes the pirates come up alongside the ship and start firing machine guns and everything to your boat. Sometimes people would be forced to stop just out of fear of damage or loss of life. But what we were doing down there is to keep the sea lanes free from the Red Sea and then into and heading to the Persian Gulf. And it's off Yemen and Somalia, and between Yemen and Somalia, there's a strait called the Bab el Mandeb. And so the pirates would be coming out of Somalia because the country had collapsed. And so the way that they would make money is to board a merchant ship, take the valuables off them and sell them, or take hostages and sell them. And so that was probably one of the biggest challenges was we went down there and we had, with multiple counter-piracy operations. Well, unfortunately, we were called to rescue an American sailboat where a group of Somalis had taken a sailboat with 4 Americans on board, and we served as a part of the rescue mission. But unfortunately, the pirates killed the Americans before we could rescue them. And it was a real tragic and real hard for us because we were so close and we wanted to bring them home. But it also showed to us the reason why we have a Navy, to be able to go around the world and go out and do our best to help Americans whenever we could, no matter where they are. You know, I think of the Israelis in Tebbe when they rescued a bunch of Israelis who had been seized in 1976 in Uganda. You know, the U.S., they said, we'll go wherever the Jewish people are to rescue them. That's what the Israeli government said. And so I think that's the same motto we have. Wherever you are, we'll come find you. We're going to bring you home because you're Americans.
Thank you. That was a great explanation, and I think really interesting context too. Thank you. So through your stories, you've told us about so many varied experiences you have in so many different places that you were. I'm curious, How did you stay in touch with your family and your friends while you were away? Was that difficult, or did you find ways to be able to stay connected?
When I first entered in 1990, we had letters, and we would write numbers on back of the letters so you could determine which letter you got. So like 1 on back of it, and then sometimes you get responses. The number would be responses. So you're thinking, hey, I got letter 5 and 7 today. What happened to letter 6? So you're always missing part of the story. We did have email, so letters were the main thing. Packages. We pulled into port. We'd make phone calls home from the hotel or wherever. As email came online, that really opened a lot of communication. By the time I was on board Lincoln, my last tour, we would send emails as our primary means. We didn't FaceTime. We couldn't do that because of security concerns. But really, that was the main thing. And sometimes you could call from the ship. Now you could call directly from the ship, back home. And, that just mattered timing and having a phone availability. So that's a good way to stay in touch, but letters and so forth. But that's probably the hardest part, is being away from your family and trying to stay in touch and missing those years that they were growing up or doing fun things. But then again, why did I join the military? To protect them. So that was the purpose of what I do.
Yeah, amazing. It has changed a lot, but you're right. It's tough being away, but it's such an important reason to be away. So a couple more questions we have here. One of which is there anything specific as like a takeaway that you want young people on this call and in classrooms to understand about military service as a whole?
Yeah, I would say, first and foremost, just there's a price for freedom. Democracy is not a spectator sport. You got to get involved. You got to vote. You got to participate in your community and give back. And I think those of us who wear the uniform and wear it on Veterans Day, because we want to remember our country. John F. Kennedy said in 1961 during his inaugural address, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So you need to be asking, what can I do for my country or my community? And understand that those who paid a price for freedom, we need to remember that. And for some veterans, it's hard for them to talk about because serving came at a cost. They lost friends in combat, or they experienced pain or other difficulties in the service, and we need to be sensitive to that. And I think for me, it made me become less self-centered and look at the greater needs of the organization. You got to ask yourself, what's best for my command? Or what, it's not just about me, what's best for the people I'm serving? And sometimes that means that maybe I don't get the job I want, or maybe I don't get the promotion I want, but what's best for everyone, and being selfless. And most importantly, be a lifelong learner. Always be learning about things going on around you, be learning about your environment, get a worldview so you can be a successful member of the global commons.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think you mentioned it a little bit there. I was going to ask you, what did you learn about yourself? And I think you covered a little bit there in that answer as well. We just have one more minute. So I wanted to see, do you have any other words of wisdom or parting advice for young people, students in the classroom before we end our time together?
I would just say, one of the things that helped me in my life is I love studying biographies. And I think if you're looking for a solution to a new problem, read an old book. And I've learned a lot by reading about political leaders, military leaders. And I think that's where you can learn a lot, and always look to improve yourself, always look to challenge yourself, take every leadership opportunity you get offered and seek them out. And read those biographies to get a context to understand, hey, this is not a new situation. Other people faced it. The question is, how are you going to face it? How are you going to lead? How are you going to be a better American? Invest in your country and give back wherever you can.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all of the advice, for sharing your experiences and for having your experiences and giving your time to the Navy and to our country, out to our benefit. So we appreciate you. We thank you. And I will hand it over to Darby or to you if you have any last words for us.
Awesome, Sarah. Thank you. Thank you, Shep. Happy Veterans Day to you. This has been truly an honor for all of us to have some time with you today and hear your story. We are incredibly grateful for your service. And a big thank you to everyone in schools and at home who have tuned in with us today to share in this memorable and inspiring experience. Looking ahead, we can't wait to connect more students from around the nation to meet veterans in person, just like you, Shep, in Washington, D.C., to provide those standing ovations that are so well deserved as veterans arrive in our nation's capital. Our relationship with the Honor Flight Network is something that all of us at EF are so immensely proud of, connecting the generations and allowing history to truly come alive in a most meaningful and important way. This just speaks to the heart of EF Education First. So as we close, please take just a few minutes to answer the survey that will pop up. We would love everyone's feedback. Thanks again to everyone and to you, Shep, and happy Veterans Day to all. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.